Wolf, a criminal case against President Donald Trump is alive again with a new prosecutor. This is the case in the state of Georgia in Fulton County around the 2020 election, Donald Trump's efforts there, and an alleged conspiracy that he led or is alleged to have led with top officials, including Rudy Giuliani, advisors on his campaign, as well as many people in that state who acted as fake electors. This is a case that had been charged 2 years ago and had been essentially on ice, in limbo. It was not moving forward because the prosecutor, Fani Willis, she had been removed from it earlier by a state court.
The courtroom just became a war zone, and Donald Trump is losing badly. Federal Judge William Fitzpatrick just dropped the hammer on the Trump administration for misconduct in prosecuting former FBI Director James Comey, imposing sanctions and threatening even worse outcomes if the abuse continues. But here's where it gets absolutely wild. As the judge was delivering this searing ruling, Trump completely lost it, launching into a Truth Social meltdown and going on live television to attack federal prosecutors, screaming that they're running a witch hunt for Biden and shaming the Justice Department. We're watching a president have a complete breakdown in real time as a federal judge exposes his vindictive prosecution scheme and imposes actual consequences for his abuse of power. So, let's get back to the video.
We just walked through perspectives on that. Where do you come down?
You know, I think this is something where you do want to see an aggressive approach by law enforcement. To me, if I were running this investigation, I'd want to broaden it away from just focusing on the events of January 6th and do what the committee has been doing, which is to look at the context, to look at a broader spectrum of possibly criminal behavior, but all of the conduct, and then start making some charging decisions about where to take the investigation.
Judge Fitzpatrick didn't mince words in his ruling, stating there was a reasonable basis to question whether government misconduct tainted the targeting of Comey. Think about what that means. A federal judge is essentially saying the Trump administration's prosecution of a former FBI director appears to be corrupt, vindictive, and potentially criminal. The judge is so concerned about what he's seeing that he's signaling openness to dismissing the entire case for vindictive prosecution. This isn't just a slap on the wrist. This is a federal judge saying Trump's Justice Department is so corrupt that their prosecutions might need to be tossed out entirely. These specific sanctions the judge imposed are devastating for Trump's case against Comey. We're talking about restrictions on evidence the government can use, orders for the DOJ to turn over additional internal communications that could reveal more misconduct, and the threat of even harsher penalties if the abuse continues. The judge referenced what he called a disturbing pattern of profound investigative failures, which is judicial language for you guys are either incompetent or corrupt, and either way, you're going to face consequences. This is the kind of ruling that destroys prosecutions and ends careers. That's what we just walked through perspectives on that. Really, what triggered Trump's meltdown was when Comey's lawyers argued in court that Trump personally directed this criminal case as revenge. The judge found this claim serious enough to demand further Justice Department disclosures, which means he thinks there's credible evidence that the President of the United States is using criminal prosecutions to punish his enemies. This is a banana republic stuff, and a federal judge is calling it out in open court. No wonder Trump is panicking and lashing out. His vindictive scheme is being exposed for exactly what it is. Trump's response to these consequences has been absolutely unhinged. He went on live television and Truth Social to attack not just the prosecutors, but the judge himself, claiming this judge wants to protect corrupt deep state actors and promising we will fight this corrupt system. Let that sink in. The President of the United States is publicly attacking a federal judge for holding his administration accountable for prosecutorial misconduct. This isn't normal political rhetoric. This is a direct attack on the independence of the judiciary by someone who's furious that he's facing consequences for his abuse of power. The timing of this couldn't be worse for Trump. Just ashes trying to use the Justice Department as his personal weapon against enemies. A federal judge is exposing the corruption and imposing real consequences. This ruling doesn't just affect the Comey case. It sends a message to every prosecutor in the DOJ that if you engage in vindictive prosecution at Trump's direction, you will face sanctions. Your cases will be dismissed and your career will be destroyed. The judicial branch is drawing a line in the sand and telling Trump that the Justice Department is not this personal revenge squad. Let's dig into the specifics of what Judge Fitzpatrick found that has Trump in such a panic. The judge's reference to a disturbing pattern of profound investigative missteps isn't just bureaucratic language. It's a devastating indictment of how the Trump administration has weaponized law enforcement. The judge examined the evidence and found that the investigation into Comey wasn't following normal procedures, wasn't based on legitimate law enforcement priorities, and appeared to be motivated by something other than seeking justice. When a judge uses language this strong, it means they've seen evidence of serious corruption that shocks everyone. The court sanctions imposed are particularly significant because they're designed to expose more wrongdoing. By ordering the DOJ to turn over additional internal communications, Judge Fitzpatrick is essentially forcing the administration to reveal the paper trail of their vindictive prosecution. These documents could include emails between Trump and DOJ officials, memos discussing the political motivations for prosecuting Comey, and evidence of pressure from the White House to pursue charges regardless of the case's value. This is the kind of disclosure that could lead to criminal charges against DOJ officials and potentially even Trump himself for obstruction of justice and abuse of power. Comey's legal team has been smart in how they frame this case by arguing that Trump personally directed criminal prosecution as revenge. They're not just defending Comey. They're exposing the entire corrupt system Trump has created. They've presented evidence that Trump has repeatedly demanded prosecution of his enemies, that he's pressured DOJ officials to bring charges without evidence, and that the Comey case is just one example of a broader pattern of vindictive prosecution. The judge finding these arguments credible enough to demand more disclosure is a massive victory that goes beyond just this case. The restrictions on evidence that the judge imposed his sanctions are catastrophic for the prosecution. Without key pieces of evidence, the government's case against Comey becomes much weaker, potentially impossible to prove. But more importantly, these sanctions send a message to every prosecutor working on Trump's revenge cases. If you participate in vindictive prosecution, the courts will handicap your case, exclude your evidence, and potentially dismiss your charges entirely. This creates a powerful disincentive for career prosecutors to go, along with Trump's corrupt schemes. Trump's live attacks on the prosecutors and the judge reveal just how desperate and panicked he is about these developments. His claim that prosecutors are running a witch hunt for Biden is particularly bizarre, given that these are his own appointees and employees at DOJ. He's essentially admitting that he can't control his own Justice Department, that career prosecutors are refusing to go along with his corruption, and that judges are holding him accountable. His promise to fight this corrupt system is really a promise to fight against the rule of law itself because the system isn't corrupt. It's working exactly as designed to prevent abuse of power. The judge's openness to dismissing the case entirely for vindictive prosecution represents an existential threat to Trump's entire revenge agenda. If the Comey case gets dismissed on these grounds, it sets a precedent that could be used to challenge every other political prosecution Trump has initiated or planned. We're talking about potential dismissals of cases against other Trump enemies, civil lawsuits against the administration for malicious prosecution, and criminal investigations of DOJ officials who participated in the scheme. One judge's ruling could unravel Trump's entire plan to use the Justice Department as a weapon. The internal dynamics at DOJ that these sanctions are exposing are fascinating and deeply troubling. Career prosecutors are apparently caught between Trump's demands for political prosecutions and their ethical obligations to pursue justice fairly. The judge's order for additional disclosures could reveal communications showing prosecutors expressing concerns about the cases they're being ordered to pursue, documenting political pressure from the White House, or even discussing resignation rather than participating in corruption. These revelations could trigger a mass exodus from DOJ and a complete breakdown of Trump's ability to pursue his enemies through criminal prosecution. What's particularly striking about Judge Fitzpatrick's ruling is how methodically he's building a record of governmental misconduct by documenting the disturbing pattern of profound investigative missteps. He's creating an evidentiary foundation that could support not just dismissal of the Comey case, but potentially criminal charges against those responsible for the vindictive prosecution. This is how judges fight back against corruption, not through dramatic gestures, but through careful documentation of wrongdoing that builds an undeniable case for accountability. The broader implications for the rule of law in America are staggering. If a president can use the Justice Department to prosecute his enemies without consequences, we've ceased to be a democracy and become an authoritarian state. Judge Fitzpatrick's sanctions represent the judicial branch, saying absolutely not. We will not allow the criminal justice system to be weaponized for political revenge. Every sanction imposed, every disclosure ordered, every threat of dismissal reinforces the principle that prosecution must be based on law, not politics. The consequences Judge Fitzpatrick is imposing extend far beyond just this case. They're reshaping the entire landscape of how presidential power interacts with law enforcement. By sanctioning the Trump administration for prosecutorial misconduct and threatening dismissal for vindictive prosecution, the judge is establishing clear boundaries that Trump cannot cross without facing severe repercussions. This isn't just about protecting James Comey. It's about protecting every American from becoming the target of political prosecution. The precedent being set here will constrain not just Trump, but every future president who might be tempted to use the Justice Department as a political weapon. The political fallout from this ruling is already causing chaos on Capitol Hill and throughout Trump's administration. Republicans are divided between those defending Trump's right to direct prosecutions and those quietly acknowledging that using criminal law for revenge is dangerous and wrong. Democrats are seizing on the judge's findings as proof that Trump is fundamentally corrupt and must be stopped. The revelation that a federal judge found reasonable basis to question whether government misconduct occurred is the kind of finding that triggers congressional investigations, inspector general reviews, and potentially special counsel appointments. For Trump personally, this represents a catastrophic failure of his core strategy for his second term. He came into office promising retribution against his enemies, and the Comey prosecution was supposed to be the flagship example of holding the deep state accountable. Instead, it's becoming an example of his own corruption and abuse of power. Having a federal judge impose sanctions and threats of dismissal doesn't just undermine this case. It undermines Trump's entire narrative that he's the victim rather than the perpetrator of injustice. The impact on the Justice Department's credibility and morale cannot be overstated. Career prosecutors are watching their cases get sanctioned, their evidence get excluded, and their professional reputations get destroyed because they're being ordered to pursue vindictive prosecutions. Many are reportedly considering resignation rather than continue participating in what Judge Fitzpatrick called a disturbing pattern of misconduct. The brain drain from DOJ could be devastating, leaving Trump with only loyalists willing to engage in corruption, which would make the misconduct even more blatant and the sanctions even more severe. Trump's decision to attack prosecutors and the judge publicly while the case is ongoing is legally catastrophic. His statements calling the judge corrupt and claiming the system is rigged could be used as evidence of obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, and attempt to influence judicial proceedings. Every tweet, every Truth Social post, every live television rant becomes potential evidence of Trump's corrupt intent and consciousness of guilt. His lawyers must be pulling their hair out watching him create more legal liability with every public outburst. The requirement for DOJ to turn over additional internal communications is a ticking time bomb for the Trump administration. These documents could reveal direct orders from Trump to prosecute Comey, discussions about manufacturing evidence, or admissions that the case lacks merit but is being pursued anyway for political reasons. Once these communications are disclosed, they become part of the public record and could be used not just in this case but in civil lawsuits, bar complaints against lawyers, and criminal investigations of those involved in the vindictive prosecution scheme. The precedent this sets for judicial oversight of prosecutorial discretion is remarkable and necessary. While prosecutors traditionally have wide latitude in deciding whom to charge, Judge Fitzpatrick is establishing that this discretion has limits and that vindictive prosecution will not be tolerated. This rebalancing of power between the executive and judicial branches is crucial for preventing the criminalization of political differences and maintaining public faith in the justice system. Future judges will cite this ruling when confronting similar abuses of prosecutorial power. Looking at the international implications, this ruling sends an important message about American democracy's resilience. While Trump may be attempting to use authoritarian tactics like prosecuting political enemies, the judicial system is demonstrating that it can and will push back. Foreign observers watching America's democratic institutions under stress are seeing that at least the courts remain independent and willing to impose consequences for abuse of power. This is crucial for maintaining America's moral authority to criticize authoritarian practices in other countries. The specific finding that there's reasonable basis to question government misconduct is legal language that should terrify everyone involved in this prosecution. Judges don't use such language lightly. It suggests they've seen evidence of potentially criminal behavior by government officials. This could trigger bar investigations of the lawyers involved, inspector general investigations of DOJ practices, and even criminal investigations of those who participated in the vindictive prosecution. The consequences could extend far beyond just sanctions, in this case to actual criminal prosecution of the prosecutors themselves. For James Comey personally, this ruling represents vindication of his claims that Trump has been pursuing him out of revenge rather than legitimate law enforcement purposes. The former FBI director has maintained his innocence and argued that the prosecution is retaliation for his role in investigating Trump. Having a federal judge essentially agree with this assessment and impose sanctions for it is a massive victory that could lead not just to dismissal of charges, but to civil lawsuits against Trump and others for malicious prosecution. The timing of Trump's public meltdown during the court proceedings is particularly damaging. By attacking the prosecutors and judge while they're actively considering the case, Trump is demonstrating exactly the kind of interference in judicial proceedings that the judge is sanctioning. It's like committing the crime you're accused of while the judge is watching. This real-time demonstration of Trump's willingness to attack the justice system when it doesn't give him what he wants reinforces every concern about vindictive prosecution and abuse of power. As we watch this case unfold, we're seeing a fundamental test of whether America's institutions can withstand authoritarian assault. Trump is trying to turn the Justice Department into his personal enforcement arm, but Judge Fitzpatrick is showing that the judiciary won't allow it. Every sanction imposed, every disclosure ordered, every warning issued represents the system working as designed to prevent tyranny. The consequences the judge is imposing aren't just legal penalties. They're affirmations that in America, the rule of law still means something. The cascade effect of this ruling is already being felt in other cases where Trump has directed prosecution of his enemies. Defense lawyers in those cases are citing Judge Fitzpatrick's findings to argue for dismissal of their own cases. Prosecutors are reconsidering whether to proceed with politically motivated charges. Judges are scrutinizing government conduct more carefully. The Comey case is becoming a template for how to fight back against vindictive prosecution. And the consequences imposed here are sending shockwaves through every political prosecution Trump has initiated or planned. This story is far from over, but the pattern is clear. When Trump tries to weaponize the justice system for revenge, judges are prepared to impose real consequences. The sanctions in the Comey case are just the beginning. If Trump continues pursuing vindictive prosecutions, we can expect more sanctions, more dismissals, and potentially criminal charges against those who participate in the corruption. Judge Fitzpatrick hasn't just imposed consequences on this one case. He's fired a warning shot that the entire federal judiciary is watching and won't tolerate the abuse of prosecutorial power for political ends. Trump's furious attacks on the system only prove that the consequences are working and that his dreams of using the Justice Department as his personal vengeance machine are crumbling under judicial scrutiny.